The pen was in my hand 1 second and on the table the next. I don't remember setting it down. I only remembered the silence after I hung up and the way the kitchen felt different inside, like the air had shifted into something I couldn't name yet. The reason for all these is because my daughter got married behind my back with my money, claiming I was dead just to inherit my wealth. My name is Carla Whitfield. I am 61 years old who own a commercial cleaning company. One I built from one contract and a second-hand van. I have given my life to two things: my business and my daughter. That Tuesday morning I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing payroll for Whitfield Commercial Cleaning when my phone lit up with a Hawaii area code I almost let ring out. Almost. I haven't spoken to Marcus Tennant in 4 years. We share a father. That's where the sharing ends. After our mother's estate was settled, or rather after it wasn't settled so much as quietly abandoned by both of us, we stopped calling. No argument, no formal ending. Just two people who set something down and never went back to pick it up. So when his number came through, I sat there for 3 full rings because Marcus does not call without a reason. And I was not sure I was ready for whatever his reason was. Answered. He introduced himself carefully, the way people do when they're not sure how they'll be received. Then he told me something strange had happened. A large destination wedding had checked into his hotel in Oahu. Marcus owns the property, but he doesn't spend his days standing behind the front desk. What he does do is greet certain wedding parties personally when they're spending the kind of money that turns a weekend into a major booking. He said he had been speaking briefly with the bride during one of those introductions when something about her face bothered him. Not in a bad way, in a familiar way. Later that afternoon, he found himself thinking about it again. He went back to his office and pulled out an old photograph he had kept for years, one taken before our father remarried, back when all the complicated pieces of our family still fit together. I was in it. So was my daughter. The resemblance hit him immediately. He said he checked the wedding file afterward, partly out of curiosity and partly because he couldn't shake the feeling. The bride's married name was listed as Ashby. But one of the family contact references in the wedding paperwork contained the surname Whitfield. That was enough to make him look twice. Then he said, when one of the guest services employees asked the bride about family attending the ceremony, she told them her mother passed away 2 years ago. A stroke. He said she seemed comfortable saying it like it was something she had said before. I didn't speak. He waited. Thanked him. I told him I'd be in touch. Hung up. I sat at that table and I did not move for a long time. Not because I was falling apart. I want you to understand that I sat there because something in me went very still and very cold and very focused all at once. The way it does when something enormous has happened and your body understands it before your mind is ready to name it. My daughter told strangers I was dead. She was getting married tomorrow to a man I have never seen in a state I have never been to, at a hotel owned by a half-brother she doesn't know exists. And she told every person at that wedding that her mother died 2 years ago. If you've been following this channel for any time at all, you know I don't tell stories. I haven't lived. Stay with me through this one. What happened next will show you exactly what a mother does when she realizes the child she sacrificed everything for looked the people in her new life in the eye and erased her. I pushed back from the table. I walked to the filing cabinet in the corner of my home office. I opened the second drawer and I pulled out a spiral-bound document, 22 pages, color-coded tabs, professionally printed. The business plan my daughter presented to me 8 months ago. The same plan I read twice, cover to cover, before I wrote her a check for $250,000. I set it on the table in front of me and I looked at it for a long time. That business plan sat on my kitchen table all night. I didn't open it. I already knew every page. I had read it twice the first time Tamara put it in my hands. Every projection, every phase, every number she'd laid out in those color-coded sections like she was presenting to a boardroom. I knew it because that's who I am. I don't sign anything I haven't read. I don't write checks I haven't considered. That discipline is the reason I still have anything at all. Let me tell you what $250,000 means to a woman like me. I started Whitfield Commercial Cleaning 30 years ago with one contract, a small office complex off Camp Creek Parkway in southwest Atlanta that needed overnight cleaning 3 days a week. I drove a second-hand van with a busted passenger window I covered with plastic wrap for the first 8 months. I was the employee, the manager, the scheduler, and the accountant. I did not take a vacation for 6 years. I did not buy a new car until the business could absorb the payment without touching my personal savings. That savings account was sacred. I treated it the way some women treat jewelry passed down from their mothers. Something you don't sell, don't borrow against, don't explain to anyone. Over 30 years, it grew into just over $300,000. My retirement, the only soft landing I had ever built for myself. Tamara grew up watching me build it. She sat at this same kitchen table doing homework while I reconciled invoices. She knew what every dollar in that account cost me because she watched me spend the hours that earned it. 8 months ago, she came to me with a plan to launch a boutique events planning company. The proposal was 22 pages with the appendix stripped. Quarterly repayment structure, revenue projections broken into 3 phases, an LLC already registered. It looked like the work of someone who had done their research and taken the idea seriously. I asked her questions over 2 evenings. She answered every one without hesitation. What I did not do was verify the LLC independently. I have sat with that since Marcus's call, not with shame, with clarity. I am a woman who reads contracts. I am not a woman who runs background checks on her own child. That distinction is not a weakness in my intelligence. It was a deliberate gap Tamara understood better than I did. She didn't deceive me despite knowing me. She deceived me because she knew me. She knew exactly how far my trust extended, and she built her plan inside that distance. I had her sign an acknowledgement of receipt before I wrote the check. 1 page, her signature at the bottom confirming she received $250,000 from Carla Whitfield for the purpose of funding the business detailed in the attached proposal. Kept the original. She kept a copy. I remember thinking that the paperwork was a formality, something a businesswoman does out of habit, even when it's family. It was not a formality. It would become the most important document in everything that followed. I sat at that table until past midnight, turning pages I had already memorized, not looking for anything new, just sitting with the weight of what I now understood. That every answer she gave me, every projection she walked me through, every confident response to every question I asked was a performance she had prepared specifically for me. She knew my standards. She met them on paper. She never intended to meet them anywhere else. At 1:27 in the morning, I closed the document, picked up my phone, and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in months. Sterling Pope, my business attorney. I didn't call him to cry. I called him to read him the numbers. Sterling picked up on the second ring. I read him the check amount, the date, the LLC name, and the repayment structure Tamara had outlined in the proposal. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Bring everything in the morning, every document, every page. I'll be here at 9. That was all I needed to hear. I hung up and went to work. I pulled 11 years of financial records from the filing cabinet and spread them across the kitchen table in organized stacks. The original check carbon was in the 3rd folder I opened. $250,000, Tamara Whitfield, dated 8 months ago. My signature at the bottom in the same steady hand I've used to sign every business document I've ever produced. I set it aside. I found the signed acknowledgement behind it. Her signature, her date. Her handwriting confirming receipt of the funds for the purpose stated in the attached proposal. I set that beside the check. Then I photographed every page of the business plan with my phone. 22 pages. I took each shot twice to make sure nothing was blurred, every number clean and readable. I compiled the images into a single PDF and I emailed it to Marcus with 1 paragraph of instruction. Print this. Seal it in a plain envelope. Have your most trusted housekeeper place it on the suite table during evening turndown tonight. No name on the envelope. Nothing written inside. Just the document. I knew Marcus would understand the assignment. He called me about a thing most people would have stayed out of. That told me enough about where he stood. What I was sending Tamara was not a message. It was a mirror. Her own business plan. The document she spent weeks constructing to earn my trust. Placed silently in the room where she was celebrating the life she had built on top of my grave. No accusation attached, no demand. Just the paper sitting there so she would know that I knew. And more importantly, so she would spend every remaining hour of that honeymoon trying to calculate what I planned to do about it. People like Tamara don't panic when a plan breaks. They recalculate. She would open that envelope, recognize what she was holding, and immediately begin building a new version of events she could present to me. That process would take her at least 72 hours. I was counting on it. After I sent the email, I called Vivian. My sister answered on the first ring, the way she always does when it's late and I'm calling. I told her what Marcus said. I told her about the document. I told her about Sterling. I said all of it in the same flat tone I'd been using since I hung up with Marcus because it was the only tone I had left. Vivian said she was coming over. I told her no. I needed to think, and I couldn't do that with another person in the room. She went quiet for a moment and then she said, "Call me if that changes." I told her I would. Meant it. I sat at that table until 3 o'clock in the morning, not crying, going through every conversation from the past 8 months, every visit, every phone call, looking for the moments I dismissed. The slight hesitation before certain answers, the way she steered me back to the proposal whenever I asked about her personal life, the fact that she never once mentioned a man she was serious enough about to marry. I had not been blind. I had been trusting. There is a difference, even if the outcome looks the same. At 6:15 I got up, showered, dressed in the same way I dress for any important meeting, carefully without rushing. Picked up my files. I walked to my car. I drove to Sterling Pope's office looking exactly like a woman who had a 9 o'clock appointment. Sterling Pope's office is on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street, where the windows face north and the light comes in flat and even all morning. I sat across from his desk with my folders stacked in front of me. And while he reviewed the documents I had brought, part of my mind was 4,000 miles away in a hotel suite in Oahu. I knew what time the turndown service ran at a hotel like Marcus's. Early evening, same time every night. Fresh towels, dimmed lights, 2 chocolates on the pillow. Routine so practiced it becomes invisible. Nadine would have placed the envelope on the suite table without a word because that's what 20 years of quiet professionalism looks like. No explanation required. Just an envelope sitting there the way hotel correspondence sometimes does. Tamara would have come back from the wedding dinner loose and happy, champagne still warm in her chest, a new last name, a room full of people who believed every word she had ever told them. She would have seen the envelope and reached for it the way you reach for something you expect to be pleasant. And then she opened it. I have thought about her face in that moment more than I should admit, not with satisfaction, with a specific and focused attention because I needed to understand exactly what she understood when she saw those pages. She would have recognized the document immediately. She created it. Every tab, every projection, every phase heading was something she designed. Seeing it in that room, in that envelope, with no note attached and no name written anywhere, that silence would have told her more than any confrontation ever could. She knew I was alive. She knew I had found out. She knew I had already moved. What she didn't know was how much further the movement went. My phone buzzed once on Sterling's desk while he was reviewing the documents. Marcus. The message contained only 2 sentences. He's seen it. She asked the front desk 3 times who delivered it. I looked at the screen for a moment and set the phone face down beside my folders. That was all I needed. Sterling set the last page down and looked at me over his glasses. He told me the LLC registration showed no evidence of actual business activity beyond what appeared in the documents I had already brought him. The registered agent address was a commercial mail facility. No payroll records, no operating history. No client contracts. No indication that the company had ever functioned as the active events business it had been presented to me as. He said it plainly. The company Tamara presented to me as an active events business had the paperwork of something real and the interior of an empty room. I listened without moving. He told me the documentation I brought, The original check carbon, the signed acknowledgement, the full proposal, made this one of the cleaner fraud matters he had reviewed in recent years. He was careful to say the full picture would sharpen as additional records were obtained. Sterling is not a man who overpromises. That precision is exactly why I called him. I looked at the stacked folders between us. 30 years of careful living reduced to exhibit documentation. Every dollar I had protected. Every sacrifice I had made without complaint. Every hour I had spent at that kitchen table instead of somewhere softer. All of it traceable now through a paper trail that led directly back to my daughter's signature. I asked him how long. He didn't rush the answer. He straightened the edge of the top folder with 2 fingers and said, "If you want this done properly, long enough for it to hold." He nodded, picked up my bag, thanked him. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby and stood there watching the numbers count down with my hands perfectly still at my sides. Long enough for it to hold. Could wait. 3 days of silence told me everything I needed to know before she said a single word. I had expected the call. What I hadn't expected was how precisely the timing confirmed what I already suspected about how my daughter's mind worked. 72 hours. Not 1. Not 24. 72. Enough time to recover from the shock. Enough time to build a new structure around the damage. Enough time to convince herself she had found an angle that could still work in her favor. When my phone lit up with her number on the 3rd day, I sat back in my chair and watched it ring twice before I picked up. She started talking before I finished saying hello. There was an explanation. There was a misunderstanding. The money was always going to be repaid. She had every intention. She just needed time to get the business properly launched before the first payment. She should have communicated better. She knew that. She was sorry about the communication. She needed to explain in person. If I would just let her explain in person, everything would make sense. She talked for nearly a full minute without pause, and I recognized the rhythm of it. Practiced, structured, each sentence moving quickly into the next, so there was no space for me to interrupt, and no silence in which she might lose control of the direction. I let her finish. When she finally stopped, I said, "Baby, enjoy your honeymoon. We'll sort everything out when you get home." Then I hung up. She called back within 4 minutes. I set the phone face down on my desk and went back to the invoice I had been reviewing before she called. She called a second time 11 minutes after that. I let that one go too. I knew what she was doing in the silence between those calls. She was sitting somewhere in that hotel, on the balcony maybe, or in the bathroom with the door closed so Conrad wouldn't see her face, running every calculation available to her. She would have considered reframing the entire thing as a loan dispute between family members. She would have considered appealing to my emotions as her mother. She would have considered presenting a payment plan so organized and sincere that it might soften whatever I had already put in motion. But the document in that envelope closed every one of those doors. Her own business plan sitting on that sweet table meant I already had the paper. Any story she tried to tell now had to fit around 22 pages of her own projections, her own repayment schedule, her own signature. There was no version of events she could construct that didn't begin with the fact that she had presented me with a fraudulent proposal and collected $250,000 against it. So she did the only thing left to do. She went back to her husband and she performed the rest of her honeymoon. Conrad noticed the shift. I know this not because anyone told me at the time, but because I know how these things move. A woman carrying that kind of weight cannot fully hide it from someone sleeping beside her. She told him it was work stress. He accepted it the way people accept explanations they don't entirely believe but aren't yet ready to challenge. A small fracture, invisible from the outside, the kind that widens quietly over time. I went back to work. I reviewed the week's contracts. I answered 3 emails from a facilities manager at one of my city accounts. I ate dinner at my kitchen table and went to bed at a reasonable hour. At 8:40 the next morning, Sterling called. He said the LLC audit had come back. He said there was something I needed to see. I was back in Sterling's office by 9:15. He had the audit summary printed and laid flat on the desk when I walked in. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't ask how I was doing. He turned the first page toward me and started talking. And I understood immediately that what he was about to show me was not a simple accounting of missing money. It was a blueprint, a complete, deliberate, carefully sequenced blueprint that my daughter had been building long before she walked into my kitchen with that spiral-bound proposal. Every dollar they had been able to trace so far pointed in the same direction. The Hawaii hotel deposit paid directly from the LLC account within 2 weeks of my check clearing. $85,000 moved cleanly, recorded under the events company name as a vendor payment. The business account records showed additional withdrawals over the following weeks. Some were tied to travel expenses. Some appeared connected to wedding-related vendors. Others had no obvious business purpose attached to them at all. And then the number that stopped me. $52,000. Sterling explained that the business records showed a transfer of that amount leaving the LLC account 4 months before the wedding. Through information gathered from related records and professional inquiries, his office had reason to believe the funds ultimately became part of a financial arrangement connected to Tamara and Conrad Ashby. According to the information they had gathered, the money had been represented as part of Tamara's personal financial contribution going into the marriage. Her money built from her business. Evidence that she was a woman of independent financial standing. Every dollar of it came from my check. I sat with that for a long moment. Not because I needed time to understand it. I understood it immediately. I sat with it because understanding something completely and absorbing what it means about the person who did it are two different experiences. And the second one requires more than a moment. This was not impulsive. There was no version of this that could be called a mistake or a lapse in judgment or a plan that got out of hand. The LLC was registered before she approached me. The joint financial arrangements with Conrad appeared after she had already confirmed I would write the check. The entire structure, the proposal, the repayment schedule, the professional presentation, existed for one purpose. To move $250,000 out of my retirement account and into a life she was constructing without me in it. She had not taken from me carelessly. She had engineered it. I asked Sterling about the $52,000 connected to the Ashby financial arrangement. He set down his pen and explained it carefully. If those funds could be shown to have originated from a fraudulent transaction, the source of the money became highly relevant. The fact that it later moved into a shared financial arrangement did not erase where it came from. The origin of funds matters. If the underlying transaction was challenged successfully, the transfers connected to it could become part of that challenge as well. Some questions would require formal discovery to answer completely, but what he had already seen concerned him. Tamara had not only defrauded me. She had brought disputed money into her marriage without her husband knowing its source. Whatever Conrad Ashby believed he was building with his wife, part of its foundation was my retirement account, represented as something it was not. I asked Sterling if the Ashby family had any indication of this yet. He paused. Then he said, "That's actually something I need to tell you." Marcus's hotel attorney had made a professional inquiry regarding the LLC payment that came through the property. Nothing unusual about that on its own. Large transactions sometimes raise questions when attorneys start looking at related records. The inquiry eventually reached a colleague whose firm has a working relationship with the Ashby family's legal counsel. He said, "I don't know yet what was communicated, but the inquiry was made." I had never seen a photograph of Eleanor Ashby. Never heard her name spoken aloud until Marcus's call pulled back the curtain on everything Tamara had been constructing. My daughter had kept those two worlds so completely separate that the Ashbys and I existed in the same city without a single point of contact between us. That separation was not accidental. It was architecture. The same careful architecture she applied to everything else. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Eleanor Ashby had already been paying attention. 6 months before that Hawaii wedding, Eleanor commissioned a background check on Tamara, not out of cruelty, out of the particular vigilance that comes with spending decades protecting something built over generations. The Ashby name carried weight in Atlanta. Real estate holdings, civic relationships, the kind of reputation that takes 40 years to establish and one bad marriage to complicate. Eleanor had watched her son fall in love with a woman who arrived with a polished presentation and almost no verifiable history behind the story she was telling. The report came back incomplete in ways that bothered her. Not empty. Inconsistent. The orphan narrative Tamara had shared with the Ashby family did not align cleanly with the records investigators were able to locate. The self-made entrepreneur story led back to an events company with little evidence of actual operating history. The financial profile of a woman presenting herself as an independently successful business owner appeared unusually shallow compared to the image she had described. There were records. There were addresses. There was a life. What concerned Eleanor was that the documented history and the story being told did not seem to fit together naturally. A background check on a 34-year-old woman should answer more questions than it creates. This one did the opposite. Eleanor brought it to Conrad once. She set the report on the table in front of him and told him calmly what concerned her. He looked at it. He told her that Tamara had explained her background to him directly, and he was satisfied with what she'd shared. He asked his mother to trust his judgment. She did not argue. She picked up the report. She filed it in the drawer of her desk in the study, and she waited with the patience of a woman who understood that time has a way of clarifying what uncertainty leaves unresolved. Now, her family's attorney, the same firm the Ashbys had used for 30 years, had flagged a potential issue involving the LLC that processed the wedding payment. A professional inquiry routed through a colleague connected to Marcus's hotel had raised questions the firm felt warranted a closer look. One question was enough. The Ashby firm did not need to be told twice to examine something carefully. Eleanor called Conrad. She asked him to come to the house alone before Sunday dinner. She said it once in the same calm tone she used for everything that mattered. She offered no explanation. She didn't need to. Conrad had heard that tone exactly 3 times in his life, and he knew what it meant. None of this had reached me yet. I was at my desk in Atlanta reviewing the week's payroll, the same work I had done every Thursday for 30 years. My world on the surface looked completely unchanged. Whitfield Commercial Cleaning was running its contracts, paying its people, operating exactly as it always had. Whatever was moving in other parts of this city was moving without my direct involvement. And that was precisely how I intended it. My phone lit up on the desk beside my keyboard. Atlanta area code, a number I didn't recognize, a commercial prefix, the kind that traces to a business address rather than a personal cell. Picked it up. The man on the other end spoke in a measured, unhurried voice. He said he hoped he wasn't disturbing me. He said his name was Raymond Ashby. He told me immediately that he was calling from his office line, a commercial address in Buckhead, so I would know exactly who I was speaking with before I decided whether to keep listening. That small courtesy told me something about him before he said another word. Kept listening. Raymond spoke the way men speak when they have spent a lifetime meaning what they say and have stopped seeing any reason to approach things indirectly. He told me his family had concerns about Tamara before the wedding that he wished they had pursued with more persistence. He told me Eleanor had commissioned a background report months earlier that produced results she found troubling. He said she would like me to see it, not to build a case, simply because she felt I had a right to know what they had found and chosen, to their regret, not to act on. He explained that after the questions surrounding the LLC surfaced, their attorney spent several days reviewing what information was available before advising the family that the concerns deserved closer attention. Only then had Eleanor decided he should reach out. Then he said, "The Ashby family is not your enemy, Ms. Whitfield." I didn't respond immediately. I was measuring the call, its tone, its purpose, what it was asking of me. A man in Raymond's position does not reach out to a woman he has never met without a reason that serves his family's interests as much as her own. I understood that. I didn't hold it against him. Honest self-interest is something I respect considerably more than performed generosity. He told me he was not calling to ask me to withdraw the legal proceedings. He was explicit about that. Whatever Sterling was building was mine to pursue without interference from his side. Then he asked me one question. He said, "Did she know what she was taking from you?" The question sat in the air between us, And I felt the full weight of it. Not what she took. Not how much. Did she know? Was she aware of the specific cost to the specific person she was taking it from? I said, yes. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Not a long moment. Just enough to confirm that the answer had landed the way he expected it to. Then he said, then we understand each other. That was the exchange, clean, direct, and complete in 11 minutes. When the call ended, I set my phone down on the desk and sat very still for a while. I had not expected anyone from that family to contact me. I had prepared myself for the Ashbys to close ranks around their son. To treat this as a private family matter requiring no acknowledgement of my existence. That is what families with something to protect often do. Instead, Raymond had called from his office line, stated his purpose plainly, offered me his wife's report, and asked me the one question that cut beneath every legal and financial layer straight to the human center of what had happened. What I felt was not warmth. I want to be precise about that. It was recognition. The specific recognition that passes between two people who have spent their lives building something real and find themselves unexpectedly on the same side of a loss neither of them should have had to absorb. He had built something. I had built something. And the same person had walked through both of our lives and taken what she needed without asking permission from either of us. I understood him. He understood me. That was enough. Sunday dinner at the Ashby house was in 2 days. Tamara would be sitting at that table with her husband and her new family, believing the hardest part was behind her, believing that if she could just manage me, she could still hold everything else together. She had no idea what was already sitting in that study waiting for her. Eleanor called me the morning after Raymond did. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. She told me what she intended to do that Sunday, and she told me precisely how she intended to do it. She spoke without asking my permission and without requiring my approval. She was not consulting me. She was informing me as a courtesy because she felt I had earned the right to know. When she finished, I said, "That's your house, Eleanor. You do what you need to do." She said, "Yes." And she hung up. That evening, she called back and told me everything that happened. I'm going to tell it to you the way she told it to me. The way precise women do when they want something understood correctly. The table was set when Conrad and Tamara arrived. Good china, fresh flowers, the kind of effortless presentation that takes considerable effort to produce. Raymond met them at the door. He shook his son's hand and kissed Tamara on the cheek and said she looked well. Eleanor came from the kitchen, embraced them both, and guided everyone to the table as though this were any other Sunday. The food was perfect. The conversation was pleasant. Tamara was relaxed. Eleanor noted that specifically. She was engaged, attentive, laughing at the right moments. A woman who believed the difficult portion of her life was behind her, and that all she had to do now was perform well at family dinners until the performance became normal. Gloria Fontaine was already seated at the far end of the table when they arrived. Eleanor's closest friend. 30 years in each other's lives, in each other's circles, at each other's tables. Tamara would have registered her as a family friend and nothing more. Toward the end of the meal, during a natural pause in conversation, Eleanor set down her fork and mentioned almost as an afterthought that her dear friend Gloria was planning a destination celebration and had been struggling to find a reliable events coordinator. She looked at Tamara warmly and asked, "What was the name of the company that handled your Hawaii wedding? I'd love to pass it along." Tamara gave the LLC name without a pause. Smooth, confident. The answer of a woman who had used that name so many times it required no thought. Eleanor smiled and said she would pass it along. Then she moved the conversation to something else entirely. Gloria said nothing. She lifted her coffee cup and drank. After the table was cleared, Eleanor asked Conrad to help her find something in the study. He followed her down the hall. She opened the door, waited for him to enter, and then placed 2 documents side by side on the desk. The background check report from 6 months ago. The fraud summary her attorney had prepared from the LLC inquiry. She set them down with the same hands that had set that dinner table, carefully, without hurry. Then she walked out and pulled the door closed behind her. Conrad sat alone in that study for 20 minutes. Tamara waited in the living room. Eleanor offered her more coffee. She accepted. They spoke about nothing significant. Gloria sat nearby and said very little, and her silence had a texture to it that Tamara would not have been able to name but would have felt. When Conrad came back into the living room, his face had the careful blankness of a man managing something he had not yet decided how to carry. He thanked his mother for dinner. He told Tamara it was time to go. In the car, she tried twice to reach him. He answered in single sentences. By the time they pulled into their parking space, she understood that something had broken. She just couldn't confirm the shape of it yet. Eleanor called me Monday evening to tell me how Sunday had ended. I thanked her and set the phone down and went to bed at my usual hour. Whatever was happening inside that apartment across the city was no longer something I could control or needed to. I had built what I needed to build. Other people were now living inside the consequences of what Tamara had constructed. I learned the rest of it later. Pieces from Sterling, a brief word from Raymond in a follow-up call that week, and eventually from Tamara herself. I assembled it the way I assemble most things, carefully, without rushing to conclusions. Conrad was gone before she woke up. No note, no text waiting on her phone when she opened her eyes. Just his side of the bed empty, and the apartment carrying that specific silence that feels different from ordinary morning quiet. She called him at 7. He let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7:40 and that time he answered in 3 sentences. Early meeting. Home for dinner. The call ended before she could position a question. She would have heard it immediately. The difference between a husband who is briefly unavailable and a man who has already made a decision lives in the texture of 3 sentences. The words were neutral. The tone was managed. Managed is not the same as reassuring, and Tamara was too observant a person not to recognize the difference. He was not home for dinner. From what I later pieced together, she spent that day doing what people do when the structure they've built begins to shift beneath them. The Ashbys had seen the documents. That much was confirmed by the drive home the night before. Conrad had read something in that study that changed the texture of his voice. Whatever explanation she was preparing now had to account for what was already in their hands. The options available to her were narrowing. An attorney would formalize things quickly. Conrad was answering her calls but giving her nothing. The only remaining door that had not already been complicated by paperwork, attorneys, and family investigations was me. She did not call first. That detail came directly from her. Calling gives the other person the opportunity to refuse before you've had a chance to be present in the room. Showing up removes that option. You are already there, already visible, already requiring a response that a phone allows someone to withhold. Whether consciously or not, that was the choice she made. She drove to my house because it offered the best chance of a conversation she could no longer control from a distance. I was at my desk when I heard the car pull up. I recognized the sound of her engine, a detail that sits in a mother's memory the way certain things do without being placed there deliberately. I stood up. I walked to the front door. I opened it before she reached the steps. She looked the way people look when they have spent an entire day preparing for a conversation and are now standing at the threshold of it. Composed on the surface, something tightly wound underneath. She opened her mouth to begin whatever she had rehearsed on the drive over. I stepped aside. I didn't say her name. I didn't say come in. I simply made space in the doorway and walked back toward the kitchen because whatever she had come to say, she was going to say it at my table, in my house on my terms. The door closed behind her. I filled 2 cups without asking if she wanted one. I set hers on the table in front of the chair across from mine. I sat down. I wrapped both hands around my own cup and I waited. Tamara sat. She looked at the coffee for a moment. Then she looked at me, and something in my stillness, the fact that I wasn't angry, wasn't crying, wasn't leaning forward with accusations, seemed to loosen whatever she had been holding tightly the entire drive over. She started talking. It came out in the uneven rhythm of something that had been compressed for a long time. The shame first, the particular shame of growing up in Southwest Atlanta, watching me leave before sunrise and return after dark, of bringing friends home to an apartment where the furniture was functional and the neighborhood was difficult and nothing looked the way she wanted her life to look. She said she loved me. She said that quickly, as if she needed it on the record before everything else. Then she kept going. She talked about the Ashbys, about the first time she visited their home and understood the distance between where she came from and where Conrad had grown up, about the fear that if they ever looked too closely at where she came from, the relationship might not survive it. She said she told herself it was temporary, that once she was established, once the business was real and the money was repaid and she had built something that could stand beside what they had, she would find a way to bring everything together. She talked about the money, about how she convinced herself the business plan was real enough in intention that it justified what she had done. About the repayment schedule she had genuinely expected to honor. About the morning she wrote the first payment date into her calendar and then moved it again and then stopped looking at it. She never called it theft. I noticed that even now, sitting across from me, she reached for words like pressure and fear and temporary and intention. She was trying to explain herself honestly, but there were still places she couldn't quite bring herself to stand. She was crying before she reached the middle of it, not performing. I have watched my daughter perform emotions since she was 7 years old, and I know the difference. This was real. The grief of a woman who had arrived at the far end of a long series of choices and could finally see the shape of what those choices had cost. I did not move. I did not reach for her hand. I did not offer the comfort she had perhaps hoped my stillness was concealing. When she finished, the room was quiet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at me with the exhausted openness of someone who had said everything she was capable of saying and was now simply waiting. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "I know." Not, "I forgive you." Not, "I understand." Not, "It's going to be all right." Just those 2 words, flat and complete, because they were the only ones that were entirely true. I knew her shame. I knew her fear. I knew the plan and the intention and the morning she stopped looking at the calendar. I knew all of it. And it did not change a single thing that needed to happen next. I said, "Sterling Pope is handling the legal side. I can't pull that back now, even if I wanted to. What happens next is between you and the courts." I stood up. I rinsed my cup and set it in the drying rack. I said, "Lock the door when you leave." I walked down the hall to my bedroom and closed the door. Not a slam, a close. The quiet, final sound of a woman returning to the only space in her house that still belonged entirely to her. 3 days later, Tamara was served papers at the apartment. The filing said, "Annulment, not divorce." Sterling called me on a Thursday afternoon with the kind of measured tone he uses when information is significant, and he wants to make sure I hear it without the delivery obscuring the content. He told me the Ashby family attorney had filed for annulment. He said it clearly and then he gave me a moment before he continued. The grounds were material misrepresentation, specifically Tamara's false financial background, the disputed origin of the $52,000 she presented to Conrad as personal savings, and the deliberate claim that her mother was deceased. That last detail, Sterling explained, carried particular weight. It was not a family estrangement she had kept private. It was an active repeated lie told directly to the Ashby family as part of the foundation on which that marriage was built. Their attorney had documented multiple instances of Tamara stating her mother had died from a stroke. It was part of the identity she had constructed to secure the relationship. I sat with that for a moment, not the legal framing. The plain fact of it. My daughter had looked people in the eye repeatedly and told them I was dead. Not as a figure of speech, not as an exaggeration. As a stated fact she offered without hesitation whenever the subject arose. Sterling was honest with me the way he always is. He said annulment on these grounds was an aggressive filing. Georgia law is narrow when it comes to voiding a marriage on misrepresentation, and the threshold is high. The Ashby attorney knew that going in. He said there was no guarantee a judge would ultimately grant an annulment. The court could decide the facts supported a different outcome entirely. But he said the filing itself was consequential regardless of where it eventually landed because the process would force difficult questions into the open. Documents would be requested. Financial records would be examined. Claims would have to be supported. Allegations would have to be answered. I asked him what it meant for Tamara practically. He explained it plainly. Whatever expectations she may have had about the financial security of that marriage were now sitting under a cloud of legal scrutiny. If the annulment succeeded, there would be no marital estate to divide and no settlement to negotiate because the marriage would be treated as though it never legally existed. If it failed, the allegations and supporting documents would still become part of a process neither side could easily ignore. Either way, the quiet future she appeared to have planned was gone. Everything she had worked to position herself for inside the Ashby family had become uncertain before she had spent 30 days inside the marriage. I thanked Sterling. I told him to keep me informed. I hung up and returned to the contract I had been reviewing before he called. What I didn't know that Thursday, what reached me only later through the particular way information moves in this city, was that Gloria Fontaine had lunch that same week with 2 women from the charitable circuit she had moved through for 3 decades. The lunch was unremarkable in every visible way. Good restaurant, pleasant company. The usual conversation of women who have known each other long enough to speak in shorthand. At some point, Gloria mentioned that the Ashby family had been dealing with a difficult situation involving Conrad's new wife. She said it quietly. She said she didn't have all the details. She expressed genuine concern for Eleanor and moved on to something else within 2 minutes. She was not gossiping. Gloria Fontaine had never been a gossip in 30 years. She was simply a woman who said a true thing to 2 people she trusted in a room where trust had a way of traveling. By the following Sunday, the outline of what had happened was known by every significant person in that circuit. Not from me, not from the Ashbys publicly, just known. The way certain things become known in old Atlanta when the right person says the right true thing at the right table. My phone lit up on Friday afternoon. Tamara. I watched it ring and returned to my city contracts for next quarter. Sterling called me the evening before the first mediation session. Not to prepare me emotionally. He knew better than that. He called to confirm that every document was filed, every exhibit numbered, and every element of the civil fraud claim supported by something physical that could be placed on a table in front of another attorney and withstand examination. I told him I wouldn't be attending any of the sessions. He said he knew. He said he'd call me after each one. I went to work. The first session lasted 2 hours. Sterling told me afterward that Tamara's attorney opened by reframing the $250,000 as an informal family loan. The kind of arrangement between a mother and daughter that carries moral weight but no enforceable legal terms. A gift dressed in the language of a loan, unprovable on paper. Sterling let him finish the argument and then placed the signed acknowledgement of receipt on the table. 1 page, her signature, the date, the stated purpose, the attached proposal referenced by name. That argument did not survive the session. The second session came 1 week later. Her attorney shifted position. He acknowledged the documented transfer but argued the repayment figure should be reduced on hardship grounds. His client had limited assets, a dissolving marriage, and no operating business income. Sterling placed the LLC transaction record on the table beside the Hawaii hotel deposit confirmation, and the $52,000 transfer tied to Tamara's financial arrangements before the wedding. He noted that both movements occurred within weeks of my check clearing and that the hardship being cited had developed after the funds were spent. That argument carried no more weight than the first. By the third session, something had shifted in the room. Sterling described it without editorial. Tamara's attorney was no longer presenting strategy. He was managing his client toward a conclusion she had not yet accepted but was running out of room to avoid. The negotiation that remained was not about whether she would sign. It was about the structure of the repayment terms and how much time she would be given to meet them. The settlement was reached without a trial. Not every dollar was recoverable. Some funds were gone. Some costs would remain mine. But enough documentation existed to support a structured resolution. Tamara signed a civil judgment requiring repayment across a defined schedule. The LLC was legally dissolved as part of the agreement. The civil judgment attached to her public record the day the ink dried, not as a permanent bar to future business activity. The law does not work with that kind of blunt force, but as a documented matter that could surface whenever a lender, investor, or business partner chose to conduct due diligence. It would sit there quietly, attached to her name, for anyone who looked. I was at my office during every session. I reviewed contracts, answered emails. I approved a supply order for one of my city accounts. I did the work I had always done because the work did not pause for personal circumstances and I had never asked it to. Sterling called the evening the judgment was signed. He walked me through the final terms and confirmed everything was executed and filed. Then he paused in the way he pauses when there is one more thing he has been deciding how to deliver. He said, "There's something else." Over the past several weeks, people in the Atlanta events industry had begun asking questions. The dissolved LLC, the public filings, and the judgment had become discoverable to anyone performing routine business screening. Vendors who once might have extended trust were now asking for documentation, references, and explanations before moving forward. He said, "I thought you should know, though I suspect you won't be surprised." I wasn't. I never made a single call that wasn't about my own legal case. I never posted anything. I never spoke Tamara's name to anyone outside of Sterling, Vivian, Marcus, and the Ashbys. I want that on the record because what happened next had nothing to do with any move I made and everything to do with the way certain worlds maintain their own order without being asked. Sterling told me most of it over 2 separate calls that week. Tamara had attempted in the weeks between our kitchen conversation and the final mediation session to reintroduce herself to 2 of Atlanta's major event planning vendor networks. She reached out directly, professionally worded emails, a follow-up call on one of them. She framed the civil judgment as a disputed family matter that had been resolved and suggested it had no bearing on her professional capacity going forward. Both conversations ended politely. Neither led anywhere. The vendor networks had access to the same public records anyone else could review. The dissolved LLC, the court filings, the judgment. Businesses considering new relationships had questions, and the answers available to them were not helping her. A professionally run business does not need to accuse someone of anything when documentation already exists. It simply decides how much risk it is willing to accept. The events planning world Tamara had spent $250,000 trying to enter became considerably more difficult to navigate. Not impossible, difficult. Calls that might have been returned quickly were not returned at all. Introductions she might once have received through association no longer appeared. Conversations ended with polite promises to stay in touch. Meetings failed to materialize. No confrontation, no dramatic rejection. No scene anyone could point to and call punishment. Just hesitation, distance, questions that followed her into rooms before she arrived. At the same time, another thing was happening in a different part of Atlanta. Gloria Fontaine had lunch with 2 women she had known for decades. She mentioned that the Ashby family had been dealing with a difficult situation involving Conrad's new wife. She said very little. She did not speculate. She did not embellish. She expressed concern for Eleanor and moved on. She was not gossiping. Gloria Fontaine had never been a gossip in 30 years. She was simply a woman who said a true thing to 2 people she trusted in a room where trust had a way of traveling. By the following Sunday, the outline of what had happened was known by every significant person in that circuit. Not from me. Not from the Ashbys publicly. Just known. The way certain things become known in old Atlanta when the right person says the right true thing at the right table. I listened to all of it without asking follow-up questions. There was nothing to ask. The architecture had completed itself without my involvement. And that was precisely what I had understood would happen when I chose patience over confrontation at every turn. 3 days after Sterling's second call, a small envelope arrived at my office. Cream-colored, heavyweight paper, handwritten address. No return label, but I recognized the Buckhead postmark. I opened it at my desk. Inside was a single note card. 4 lines of careful handwriting. It read, "We hope your year ahead is a quieter one." Nothing else. No elaboration. No reference to proceedings or outcomes or anything that had passed between our families over the preceding weeks. Just that one sentence from a man who understood that some things are better acknowledged briefly than explained at length. I set the card on the corner of my desk and left it there. I thought about what it had cost Raymond to raise a son well, to build a name over 40 years, to hand that name carefully from one generation to the next, and then to watch someone walk into his family and treat all of it as a resource to be extracted. I thought about Eleanor filing that background report in her desk drawer, and waiting with the patience of a woman who had learned that time has a way of confirming what uncertainty leaves unresolved. I thought about Gloria sitting at the far end of that Sunday dinner table, finishing her coffee, saying nothing. None of them had needed me to direct them. They were protecting what was theirs the same way I was protecting what was mine. We had simply been protecting against the same person. My phone rang late that afternoon. Vivian picked up. She asked how I was doing. Not how the case had resolved. Not what the settlement covered. How I was doing. The question landed differently than I expected it to. In the place below the legal proceedings and the mediation sessions and the documents and the judgment. In the place where a mother keeps the things she has not yet allowed herself to fully look at. I was quiet for a long moment before I answered. Vivian's question stayed with me longer than I expected it to. How was I doing? Not the case, not the judgment, not the repayment schedule. Me. I sat with the phone against my ear in the quiet of my office, and I tried to locate an honest answer somewhere beneath everything that had accumulated over the past several weeks. What I found was not devastation and not relief. It was something closer to the feeling after a very long physical effort. The specific exhaustion of a body that has done what it was asked to do and is now simply still. I told Vivian I was tired. She said she knew. She said come to dinner Sunday. I said I would. Meant it. The first repayment installment posted to my account on a Wednesday morning. I noted it in my records the way I note every financial movement. Date, amount, source, purpose. One line in a spreadsheet. The judgment required structured payments across a defined schedule, and the first one arrived on time, which surprised me less than it might have surprised someone who didn't understand that Tamara had always been precise about the mechanics of things. It was the intentions behind the mechanics that had failed. The mechanics themselves she had always handled correctly. $190,000 would come back to me over time. Not everything. Legal fees had carved a portion out permanently, and the $60,000 gap between what was recoverable and what I had originally written was a real number I had no intention of pretending away. But I had built this company from one contract and a van with a broken window. I knew how to close a gap. I had been closing gaps my entire professional life. On a Tuesday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and opened the payroll spreadsheet for Whitfield Commercial Cleaning. Same table, same mug, same work that had been waiting for me every week for 30 years, regardless of what was happening in any other part of my life. The filing cabinet in the corner held different contents than it had held 3 months ago, a civil judgment with Tamara's signature among them. But the work on the table in front of me was unchanged, and that was exactly what I needed it to be. Marcus called at 11, not about any of it. He asked how I was and I told him tired but fine, and he said he understood that particular combination. Then he said he had been thinking about their mother's estate, about the 4 years of silence between us, about whether two people had let too much time settle over something that didn't deserve that much weight. I told him I had been thinking about that too. We talked for 20 minutes, longer than we had talked in years, possibly longer than we had talked in one sitting since before our father's second marriage changed the geometry of everything. When we hung up, I sat for a moment, noticing that the conversation had not cost me anything. No guardedness, no old grievance surfacing, no careful management of what I said and didn't say. Just two people who had been through something together speaking plainly. That surprised me. Let it. I worked through the afternoon, reviewed 2 contract renewals, approved a scheduling adjustment for one of my overnight crews, answered an inquiry from a facilities manager at a new account I had been building toward for 2 years. At 4:47, my phone buzzed on the desk beside my keyboard. Sterling. 1 word. I read it. I set the phone face down. I finished the last row of the payroll spreadsheet, saved the file, and closed the laptop. I turned off my desk lamp. I picked up my keys and walked to the door and locked it behind me. I drove home in the quiet.